What is stunning is that this is the only president I know of, and I've been here for 7, but I've been researching, trying to figure out ever. I don't have a definitive answer, but in the 7 with whom I've served, this is the only president who would engage and has engaged in this kind of activity overseas. It's disheartening that John McCain seized upon, appearing to have been coordinated with the White House, a man I admire, seized upon and endorsed President Bush's remarks instead of repudiating them. The president's remarks reveal a man totally out of touch with his own government, totally, completely out of touch with what he himself has authorized, and totally out of touch with the long bipartisan position of Democrat and Republican presidents on how to conduct our foreign policy. The day before the president spoke, his own Secretary of Defense called for engaging Iran. I will not take the time to read the quote. His Secretary of State has repeatedly called for engaging and sitting down with Iran. The president himself authorized diplomats to meet with their Iranian counterparts about Iraq. And he struck a deal with Libya through actually direct discussions, not him personally, but direct discussions at the highest level with Gaddafi. I got a call from the White House telling me Air Force 2 was waiting at Andrews Air Force Base several years ago. Would I please fly to Libya for a personal meeting with Gaddafi? They, I suspect, needed cover for what they were doing was the right thing. This is the President of the United States who addresses Kim Jong-il as "Dear Mr. Chairman," who has a gifted diplomat in North Korea now, negotiating one-on-one with Kim Jong-il. Folks, if you're going to have a list of the top 10 terrorists in the world and those who sponsor it, it'd be awful hard to have kept Gaddafi or Kim Jong-il off that list. The president was right to engage Libya. The president was correct to engage North Korea, just as his cabinet officials are right to want to engage Iran, just like President Nixon and Reagan were right to engage the Chinese and the Soviets. But the president was absolutely dead wrong to launch a political attack from abroad, and John McCain was wrong to support it. It's disappointing, and it's clearly beneath the presidency. I believe that the damage done was not to Barack Obama, but to American credibility. Imagine the conversations going on from Paris to Tokyo in the offices of the heads of state with whom we have to deal. I think it's time for a total change in Washington's worldview, and that's going to require more than a great soldier. It'll require a wise leader. And nowhere is this truer than in Iraq. The war stands, in my view, like a big boulder sitting in the middle of the road, denying us the credibility to be able to get other nations to join us, and denying us the flexibility to deal with our crises here at home because it's absorbing so many of our resources. Last week, as was referenced earlier by John McCain made a speech. And I'm going to focus on one portion of the speech, on Iraq. Last week, John revealed that he has no plan, none, to get us out of the mess the president has created in Iraq. The same day, as was pointed out, that the president was addressing the Knesset, John McCain was talking about his vision for the future. John said it's important for presidential candidates, and I quote, to define their objectives and what they plan to achieve, not with vague language, but with clarity. But then he painted a picture where he hopes to be in Iraq by the end of the first term without a single sentence that I could discern on the written page explaining how he'd achieve any one of these objectives. That's beyond vague. John is totally silent about how he would realize his rosy vision of 2013. And why? You have to ask yourself, John's a smart guy. Why would he not offer any plan forward? Well, I suspect that it's because if he revealed his plan, which is the Bush plan, he knows it would be summarily rejected by the American people. In his speech, John McCain predicted by 2013 the Iraq War had been won. As my former press secretary, Evan Lieberman, used to say, from your lips to God's ears. Hopefully that's true. But how? How does he do it? He foresaw that Iraq will be, quote, a functioning democracy. How? He doesn't say. By 2013, John said, quote, the civil war has been prevented, militias disbanded, and Iraqi security forces professional and competent. How? Stay in Iraq until the very last vestige of Iranian influence is eliminated. Stay in Iraq until the last member of al-Qaeda is killed. Stay in Iraq indefinitely. In fact, when Senator McCain was asked whether his vision of the war being over in 2013 amounted to a timetable, he responded, quote, it's not a timetable, it's victory. It's victory, which I've always predicted. I didn't know how or when we were going to win World War II. I just knew we were going to win. Like President Bush, John grounds his argument on a war with no end in his assessment of the dire consequences of what would happen if we began to draw down in Iraq. He argues that Iraq is the meeting point of the two greatest threats to America, al-Qaeda and Iran. It's an argument laden with irony, as I'm sure has not escaped any of you in here. Who opened the door to al-Qaeda in Iraq? President Bush. And who would keep the door open? John McCain. Al-Qaeda in Iraq is a Bush-fulfilling prophecy. It wasn't there before the war, and it's there now. Iran's influence in Iraq went from 0 to 60, as we used to say when we were kids. It went from 0 to 60, and it gave the Shia religious parties, inspired and nurtured by Iran, a path to power. No matter how we got to this point, President Bush and Senator McCain argued if we start to leave, it would further empower Iran and al-Qaeda in Iraq. I believe they're exactly wrong. And so do a large number of prominent retired military and national security experts of both parties, many of whom recently testified before my Foreign Relations Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, the longer we stay in Iraq, the more we put off the day when we can finally join the fight against the real al-Qaeda and finally to defeat those who attacked us 7 years ago. The price of staying is staggering and knowable. I believe we have to focus our remaining energy and initiatives on Iraq on achieving what virtually everyone agrees is a key to stability, a political power-sharing arrangement among the factions. And I believe the only path to such a settlement is through a decentralized federal Iraq that brings resources and responsibility down to the local and regional levels. And we need a diplomatic surge to get the world's major powers, Iraq's neighbors, and Iraqis themselves to invest in this sustainable political settlement, which their constitution calls for. When it comes to the most urgent national security challenges we face, Iraq, Iran, al-Qaeda, and Afghanistan and Pakistan, last week made it clear, at least to me, that stylistically and substantively, there is no daylight between George Bush and John McCain. They are joined at the hip. There will be, and there would be, no change with President McCain. And so it seems to me the American people have a real, defining, clear choice to make in this campaign. And I'm confident they'll make the right choice. Thank you for listening. I'll be happy to take questions.